here to talk about some films.
The Oscars are on. We've seen 5 of the big films. Adam and Tree have tried to avoid seeing The Artist. If you haven't seen it yet, please don't go and see it.
To be fair, we haven't avoided seeing it.
The most hyped film of this year, which really is a really boring A Star is Born, but they couldn't be asked to write any dialogue.
But everyone that I've talked to who has seen the film, so they were moved to tears. They were like, "Oh."
No, the only good bits are with the dog. But there's some very sentimental films this year. There's Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close, which is about 9/11. It's by Stephen Daldry, who's a great director, but I think he's made a bit of a misstep here. War Horse, and I love the play. I think the play was one of the greatest productions of the last 10 years. The film is just so sentimental, it just really doesn't work as a film. Personally, I was very disappointed in HUGO, the Scorsese film.
Yeah.
It's a very schizophrenic film.
Sounds
The first half is about this little boy in the railway station, and he completely changed his tack. That was a disappointment for me. Midnight in Paris, I so hate that film. You know my views about Woody Allen's view of the Belle Epoque. It's set 30 years too late, and there are no Frenchmen living in Paris. Out of all the films nominated for an Oscar, that is the film I really hate.
It's The Pretty Woman of 2012.
Yeah. Shall we go on and talk about the films
That we liked?
That we liked. Should we start with the most controversial? Melancholia, the most intellectual film. Melancholia is it's sort of like a very dark comedy about depression and the end of the world. There's a brilliant performance by Kirsten Dunst, for which she won the Best Actress at Cannes. Also Charlotte Gainsbourg, because people talk about Lars being impossible to work with and that he treats women appallingly. Well, she came running back to work with Lars again, and actually her performance is as good as Kirsten Dunst's in my view. And the film starts off with Kirsten Dunst. She's about to marry Kiefer Sutherland, and she's really nervous about the whole thing, and she's depressed. She doesn't know whether she can go through with it, and you follow all her angst and Charlotte Gainsbourg trying to help her, and her parents, brilliantly played by John Hurt and Charlotte Rampling, are also there trying to support her. And so the first, I guess, third of the film is about all the angst before the wedding. Do you remember Feston?
Yeah.
It did remind me of that film.
And the whole wedding thing reminds you of the dinner party in Feston.
You're just waiting for the news of the bad.
Yeah. And you just think, oh God, which relative's gonna wig out now?
And say they got buggered by the dad. And,
yeah. Meanwhile, while Kirsten Dunst is getting married, there's an enormous blue planet which is on a collision course, and it cannot be avoided. The end of the world is nigh. Kirsten Dunst decides, in effect really, to embrace it. She actually thinks this is the end of her troubled life. She doesn't really want to live anymore, but maybe she doesn't want to hang herself off a railway bridge. And so what better way to go than be hit by a giant planet? And she sort of then starts falling in love with the blue planet, and there's incredibly lyrical scenes, aren't there, where Kirsten Dunst takes off her clothes and she's lying in the garden and she's sort of mentally embracing the blue planet that's come to put her out of her misery.
Yeah. So what did you think of it?
I loved it. It's one of my top 3 films of the year.
It is one of those films that stays with you for a few days afterwards. I've talked to quite a few friends and they either love it or hate it. It's a bit like Tree of Life. It's a Marmite film. You either embrace it, love it, or you hate it, you just don't get it. And I think Melancolia's got that kind of element to it.
Well, they're both very, talking Melancholia and Tree of Life, I mean, they're both very intelligent films.
Yeah.
And I always think that actually the people who don't like either of those 2 films, it's primarily because they didn't understand what either of them were about.
That's an easy way to put it.
I really didn't like it for the first half. And then once the second half happened, I liked what I'd seen in the first half.
But the montage at the beginning of the film, though, is amazing. Isn't it? I mean, that arguably is as beautiful as the end.
I thought it was really beautiful, and I didn't think the end was like depressing. A lot of people said they thought the end was depressing because
No, she was happy. But she was happy.
Yeah, I thought
for her it was like an orgasm being destroyed by the blue planet.
I really like the whole suspension of disbelief that kind of crashes into what is otherwise kind of like just a melodrama. Did you get the whole thing? You told me about this, that she's actually clairvoyant.
Well, I picked up something in the film where I thought there was hints of her character that hinted towards her having psychic ability. The
It's really
opening
interesting.
sequences, if you observe them as her psychic vision, as something that maybe she had dreamt
Yeah.
of
Sort
an
of
impact,
a premonition.
Yeah.
a premonition.
That theory sort of makes sense of all her behavior.
What would
Like
you
you said-
do if the end of the world was coming in 24 hours, Tree?
Probably
Hopefully
go.
not on a golf course.
No, not on a golf course. I'd just say, call everyone I know, come on. You know, just blow it out.
Let's talk about the Descendants.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I actually think that is my favourite film of the year. I love the work of Alexander Payne, who's been called the prose poet of the male menopause.
That's really suitable.
First of all, he did Election,
Yeah.
Yep.
which had Matthew Broderick. Then there was Jack Nicholson in About Schmidt. And then there was Paul Giamatti in Sideways,
Yeah.
Yeah.
as the sort of the failed novelist.
Yeah.
He knows about wine.
Didn't you do Citizen Ruth as well?
It's Citizen
The
Ruth
comedy
with
about abortion?
Laura Dern.
Okay,
Yeah.
I never saw it, but
It's a hard subject to make a comedy
Yeah,
about,
yeah.
but let's stick to my thesis
Yes, let's
about
stick to
the male menopause.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that has been the subject of his last 3 films. It's about George Clooney, who in this case is a very successful land baron, whose wife is then fatally injured in a boating accident. And she's on life support. And he's told virtually simultaneously that the life support has to be switched off, and also that his wife was going to leave him for another man. He decides that he's going to find this man, that he's going to tell this man he has a chance to say goodbye to his wife before the life support's turned off. Shailene Woodley is absolutely fantastic playing the 17-year-old daughter. Absolutely brilliant. I think it's my favourite film of the year. I think George Clooney, it's his best performance ever. What do you guys think?
Well, I actually, I shed a tear. I thought it was a really stoic and amazing performance by George Clooney.
Adam, I don't know what you think.
As far as George's performance, I like him, although I don't know how diverse he is as an actor. The "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou" character,
Yeah.
I seem to see it in a lot of his
Yeah.
films, basically.
Yeah.
It wasn't as simple as that, but there was, at first I thought, oh, is it going to be the "Oh
Yeah.
Brother, Where Art Thou" character?
Yeah.
And no, it wasn't. It got to be more interesting than that. And I also liked that it was set in Hawaii. I mean, how many films do you see set in Hawaii that are about everyday life? None, really. They usually involve helicopters or surfing or something. No, I thought it was really good. I did like it.
Okay. So shall we move on to another heartthrob?
Yeah.
Yes.
Ryan Gosling.
Ryan Gosling in Drive.
Yeah.
That's a very talked about film.
In a way, though, it should appeal to both sexes, because women are madly in love with
Yeah.
Ryan Gosling.
That's it.
But also, it's a real sort of boys' film. And
Because the whole Cars thing.
it's a story of a stuntman who's also a getaway driver. And his gimmick is that he'll only wait 5 minutes. He doesn't care what you do inside the building, you can do anything you like. But if you're not out in 5 minutes, he's off. And he then falls in love with this really sweet girl down the corridor, played by Carey Mulligan. And I must say, I really think this has been Carey Mulligan's year. I mean,
Yeah,
she's fantastic
definitely.
in Shane, which we'll
Shane,
come
yeah.
on to in a minute.
Yep.
Everything's going really, really well, until her husband is let out of jail. He's obviously really fucked up, really, really badly.
He's one of those guys you see on YouTube videos trying to rob the 7-Eleven kind of guy.
But not very well.
Yeah, and so he agrees to help this guy out. I really love the film. Brilliant performances, particularly not just from Ryan Gosling, but also from Albert Brooks and
Oh,
Ron
yeah.
Perlman, who play the
absolutely.
heavies. I really loved it. I think my problem with the film is deliberately, it reminds me of The Driver,
Yes.
which was another sort of existentialist film, and he glances off a bit too often into the middle distances for my liking. But I have to say, it's a really great guys rock and roll film, and for women you get to see Ryan Gosling. I mean, you know, what's not to like?
I wanted to say something about Drive. You said that the scene in the lift was exceptional, that is the best part of the film, is the scene in the lift.
Yeah, that's the equivalent of the sort of old boy corridor scene.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
It was. I thought that was a really good scene. One of the criticisms of the film, or one of the reasons people didn't like the film, is because it's a real sort of 70s action man archetype that they didn't really go beyond or transcend or evolve.
He was a really heroic kind of character at the end. I wanted maybe him to be a little bit more nihilistic.
You hate all that redemption stuff.
Well, mostly because
movies.
it doesn't fit with the time.
He would have taken the money.
He
I
would.
mean, that's the one thing that everybody, that even people that liked it, don't agree with. They're like, he's not that
It's
cool
like,
that he
we're
wouldn't
living
take
in
the
a
money.
time of austerity. You would have taken the money.
It was a bit like recently, there was a brilliant adaptation of Treasure Island, and it was absolutely brilliant until at the end the pirates decide, having killed hundreds of people, they say, actually, we don't want the money. Get out of here, you know, what else are you going to be a pirate for? And have endless fights with cutlasses and whatever else if you don't want the money. So should we go on to Shame?
The other film that Carole gets in, Shame.
Shame is a story about a sex addict. If you haven't known a sex addict, you sort of wonder whether they really exist. It's just about you have an addiction. It's joyless. It's about this man, brilliantly played by Michael Fassbender, whose sister then comes to stay with him. She has no idea that her brother is a complete sex addict, and she walks into the bathroom and is masturbating in the toilet. She then begins to realise that her brother has really serious emotional problems.
What, just because he's masturbating in the toilet?
Well, I mean, would you actually masturbate in the toilet unless you really had to in your own flat? I wouldn't. He regards her as being a no-hoper. She's trying to be a singer. He thinks she's crap. He takes his boss out to see her sing. That's when you suddenly realise actually that she is the success of the family. She can really sing. And then she then goes home with his boss. You suddenly realise that, okay, she has talent and he has talent as a businessman, but they're both living very, very damaged worlds. And what I think is really, really clever about the film, because one of the worst things I hate whenever I'm pitching a film in Hollywood, they start going, what's the backstory? You never know. You both know that they've been damaged, but you never know what it is. And that's one of the things I think makes Steve McQueen's directing so good, is he doesn't fill in all the dots, that it's up to you to think for yourself.
Interestingly enough, when we saw the film, several people left the cinema as the film was going on. Yeah, I guess people are uncomfortable with sex, but we had the same experience when we saw Crash by David Cronenberg years ago, and half the cinema left, and we're sitting there going, this is a really great film.
It was the late 90s, and as soon as the gay kissing started, like half the audience left.
There was a guy, like 4 rows ahead of us, having Tourette's. Like, he was muttering, like,
and getting all funny.
Why does this ever happen to me?
Yeah.
This should be part of my life. I can't get 2 women in bed with me at the same time.
Why am I still living with my mom?
I thought the whole film was, you know, basically kind of nihilistic. I noticed that a lot of the people that I talked to that didn't like it are romantics, and they like sort of redemption. But I sort of saw the film as being about obsessive behavior, and it could have been about sex, it could have been about anything, it could have been gambling. What I thought was really beautiful about the film was there was moments where there was no talking. There was one scene in particular on the subway where there's a whole sort of like exchange and dance between himself and a person that is just sitting opposite him on the subway, that was sort of like sexual interest, and then self-perspective, and then guilt, and all these things. There was no talking, but it was all just done with facial expressions, yet you knew exactly what both characters were thinking about at every moment. I thought that was really, really beautiful.
We were talking about the Oscars earlier,
Yeah.
and this film has been completely snubbed.
Has it really?
Yeah. Dare I say, and I'm married to an American, but I think sometimes they find it difficult to deal with things so faceless.
Yeah, like full frontal
So I have friends that really that wanted to go to it to be like sexually challenged, to have their like dopamine level. We looked up that word earlier, didn't we? You know, that sort of phenomenon where people try and do more and more extreme things to get that same kind of adrenaline rush of their early sexual experience. People went to this film perhaps to see something that went outside their comfort zone, and I didn't think it was a film necessarily about being sexually challenging. It was just
it wasn't at all. It was
just
about the sadness of this addiction.
Yeah, I just thought it was about him feeling numb and just trying to feel something, anything, because he just wanted to have a feeling. And when that scene in the bar when he basically tried to do suicide by boyfriend.
He meets a woman.
Yeah.
And he's so in love with her because she's a great woman, but he can't have sex with someone who he feels emotionally attached to, because he's just so living in this awful world that he can only have sex with strangers. I thought it was a great film. His sister has shown him this hat, and she says, yeah, and it's vintage. And then when he takes this girl to bed who he's really smitten with, and he just doesn't know how to communicate with her, and he says to her, are your panties vintage? Because his sister's a real person, so he decides to steal stuff off her to communicate with real people. So moving from what appeared to be some awful relationship to another film dealing with the damage between a child and a parent, we need to talk about Kevin.
We need to talk about Kevin.
And we do need to talk about Kevin, which is by Lynn Ramsey. It's based on a famous book.
The actual name will be shown here in type right now.
So it's based on a very famous book about a mother dealing with grief.
Right.
And her grief is from the fact that she can't get on with her child. And that from the minute the child is born, they interact in the most horrible manner possible. It's in mutual hatred. Because I had read the book and I saw the film in Cannes, I had no idea what the denouement was going to be. But sadly, every single film critic has given away the ending, which I think actually is a real tragedy, because not many people read the book in England. It was an American publishing success. I was very lucky that I didn't know what was going to happen. You knew the way that Lynn intercut that some things were going to get really bad. But I guess as every single film critic has given the plot away, that her son, out of frustration because of the hatred he feels towards his mother, finally commits a Colombian massacre, and then the film is then about her grief. But what's clever about the film is you don't know. You can see she's in grief, but you don't know why. And it's saved till the end of the film. Tilda Swinton was brilliant.
Really good.
I think she was really good. Really good.
Lynn Ramsey adapted the book really well. But I think Lynn's directing was absolutely fabulous. I think it's Lynn's best film ever.
The art direction was quite interesting and amazing. It sort of made me think of, Don't Look Now, when they used flashes of red and as premonitions of something horrible that's going to happen as the climax of the film.
I liked the film. I thought it was great. The one criticism I had, I thought, was the character of the boy. I found a little bit too Damien from The Omen, the bad seed. I like it. I like it in a sort of kitsch way in The Bad Seed or The Omen, but I felt in terms of its believability. You know the film The Bad Seed? It's all about. It came up at the time of the nature versus nurture arguments about what makes people do crime, and I sort of thought the whole thing of him being like instantly hateful and psychotic, a little bit eye-rolly, to be honest.
The film plays it absolutely level.
Right.
Was it her lack of nurture? Because she's really not interested. She's a travel writer. She's got a big career.
So he's a burden.
Yeah, and I think the film doesn't really come down on either side. Nature versus nurture.
Right.
It could be either of them, and a large section of the film is about her grief. You see this woman in complete distress who's a completely broken rag doll. There's an implication in the film that she feels guilt for herself as a mother
Yes.
for having
It's
allowed
all
this to happen.
quite self-obsessed,
So
That's interesting.
I think
Yeah.
it's
and it's almost like there was a line in the film, one of the last lines of the film, where the young male actor said, "Well, I'm just like you. I am a product of your narcissism."
Did you ever want her to freak out? I thought she should have at some point.
yeah. I mean,
That
again, I
was-
think
that
that
was
was that was another subtlety of the
Yeah.
film, and that's why Tilda's performance was so good because
Oh, yeah,
it was
yeah.
all internalized.
When you experience these kind of negative things, that energy kind of has to go somewhere, and if you do internalize it, it has to boil over at some point. It's not anything to do with the performance particularly, but maybe sort of like the character design. I thought this is probably a problem that you could aim at the book as well.
But I think it's great news, though, that Lynn Ramsey's back as a filmmaker,
No, I thought it
making
was
films
brilliant and
again.
really good.
And I thought she did a cracker. God bless Lynn's back. But I said, just a pity that the most interesting British films have just been ignored for the Oscars this year. And it's good night from me.
Okay, so that's it.
Oh, you meant to say it. It's good
Yeah,
night
yeah.
from me.
And it's good night for me.
And it's good night from them.